My name is Ibrahim Al-Hakim, and I am 92 years old. Born in the ancient city of Damascus, Syria, my journey has been long and deeply intertwined with the traditions and faith of Islam. For over 9 decades, my life has been defined by devotion, a relentless commitment to the teachings of the Quran and the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. In my world, faith was not just a guiding principle, but the very essence of existence. As a child, I grew up amidst the narrow, winding alleys of Damascus, surrounded by the echoes of the call to prayer reverberating from towering minarets. My earliest memories are painted with the aroma of freshly baked bread from the neighborhood ovens, the melodic chants of shopkeepers, and the vibrant colors of spices laid out in the bustling souks. My family was deeply respected within our community, known for our unwavering commitment to Islamic teachings. My father, a scholar of the Quran and a man revered for his wisdom, was my first teacher. From an early age, he instilled in me the discipline and reverence needed to commit the Quran to memory. I spent hours reciting verses under his watchful gaze, learning not only the words but the weight they carried. By the time I reached my teenage years, I had memorized the entire Quran, a feat that filled my family with immense pride. As I grew older, my dedication to faith deepened. By my 20s, I had become a respected figure in Damascus, leading prayers in the grand mosques and offering guidance to those who sought spiritual clarity. My sermons drew crowds, not because of my eloquence, but because of the sincerity with which I spoke. To my community, I was more than just an imam. I was a beacon of hope and a source of unwavering faith. Decades passed, and my reputation spread beyond Damascus. I was invited to counsel leaders, mediate disputes, and preside over religious ceremonies in cities across the Middle East. With each passing year, my sense of purpose grew. I believed that my role was divinely ordained, a sacred duty to guide others on the path of righteousness. The world around me, however, began to change. Conflict and unrest swept through the region, and the streets I once walked in peace became fraught with tension. Despite the turmoil, my faith remained unshaken. I stood steadfast, teaching that Islam was a light amidst the darkness and that obedience to God would lead to eternal salvation. By the time I reached my 80s, I had become known as the oldest and most respected imam in the Islamic world. My age was a testament to God's grace, a sign of his favor upon a life dedicated to his service. Despite my years, my voice did not falter, and my conviction only grew stronger. People traveled from distant lands to hear my sermons and seek my counsel, finding solace in my words and the serenity I seemed to carry. Yet, beneath this facade of unwavering certainty, there were moments when I wrestled with questions too profound to voice aloud. As I aged, I began to feel a quiet stirring within me, a whisper that seemed to question the very foundations of my beliefs. These thoughts were fleeting, and I dismissed them as tricks of an old mind, clinging instead to the rituals and traditions that had defined my existence. The last decade of my life brought me to London, where I had been invited to lead a prominent mosque and serve as a guide to the growing Muslim diaspora in Europe. The cold, gray skies of this foreign land contrasted sharply with the warmth of Damascus, yet my faith kept me rooted. My sermons focused on unity, perseverance, and the unyielding truth of Islam. To those who listened, my words were a balm for the soul, a reminder of the eternal promises of our faith. But as the seasons passed, a deep exhaustion began to settle within me. I attributed it to the weight of my years, the weariness of a life lived in constant service. Little did I know, this sense of fatigue was not just physical, it was the prelude to a journey that would shatter everything I thought I knew about life, death, and salvation. Before we continue this story, I want to take a moment to thank you for being part of this community. If you're as captivated by stories of transformation and faith as I am, please consider subscribing to our channel. By doing so, you'll join a growing community of individuals seeking truth and inspiration. Don't forget to like this video. It helps us reach more hearts with these powerful stories. Thank you for being here. and let's continue this extraordinary journey. The evening air in London was heavy with a cold drizzle, the kind that seeped into your bones no matter how many layers you wore. I had just finished leading the final prayer of the day at the mosque, my voice echoing through the quiet, dimly lit prayer hall. The congregation, a mix of immigrants seeking solace and locals finding strength in their shared faith, had dispersed. I remained behind for a few moments, sitting cross-legged on the prayer mat, allowing myself a rare moment of stillness. My thoughts were preoccupied with the sermon I had been preparing for Friday. I had chosen to speak on perseverance, a message I felt deeply resonated with the community's struggles. Many of them faced the challenges of displacement, grappling with an unfamiliar language and culture, much like I had when I first arrived. I wanted to remind them that their faith was a refuge, a constant in an ever-changing world. As I stepped out into the night, the streets were slick with rain, and the glow of the streetlights reflected off the wet pavement. The city was alive with its usual hum. Cars rushing by, distant chatter from pedestrians, the occasional bark of a dog. I pulled my coat tighter around me and began the familiar walk home. My house was only a short distance from the mosque, a modest residence that had become my sanctuary in this bustling city. The chill in the air seemed sharper that night, or perhaps it was the weight of my thoughts. I replayed the words of my sermon in my mind, searching for the right phrases to inspire the congregation. The lessons I had taught countless times before felt distant, as if they belonged to a younger version of myself. A quiet unease began to creep in, one I couldn't quite place. As I turned onto a quieter street, a car approached from the opposite direction. Its headlights pierced through the misty rain, and for a brief moment, they seemed almost blinding. The vehicle swerved slightly, and I noticed the driver struggling to maintain control. The road was slick, and the tires skidded against the wet asphalt. In that instant, time seemed to slow. I barely had a moment to react before the car veered into my lane, heading straight toward me. There was a screech of tires, a deafening crash, and then silence. My body was thrown forward with such force that it felt as if I had been ripped from my own skin. The impact was unlike anything I had ever experienced, a sudden, violent jolt that seemed to shatter every bone in my body. Darkness enveloped me, but it was not the kind of darkness that brought peace. It was suffocating, cold, and absolute. I was dimly aware of distant voices, frantic and urgent, but they sounded as though they were coming from another world. Pain surged through me in waves, each one more unbearable than the last. I tried to speak, to cry out, but no sound escaped my lips. When I finally regained a sliver of consciousness, I found myself surrounded by paramedics. Their faces were tense, their movements hurried. I could hear fragments of their conversation, words like critical, internal bleeding, and head trauma. They worked to free me from the twisted wreckage of my car, their hands steady despite the chaos. I was placed onto a stretcher, and as they carried me to the waiting ambulance, I felt my life slipping away. Each breath was a struggle, as if my body was no longer mine to control. My mind clung desperately to the words I had recited thousands of times before. La ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulullah. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. The phrase became my anchor, a fragile thread tying me to the world I was rapidly leaving behind. The ride to the hospital was a blur of flashing lights and muffled sirens. I drifted in and out of consciousness, each moment of clarity filled with an overwhelming sense of dread. When we arrived, I was rushed into the ICU, where a team of doctors worked tirelessly to stabilize me. Machines beeped incessantly. Tubes were inserted into my body, and voices called out orders with a sense of urgency that made it clear how dire my situation was. Despite their efforts, I felt myself growing weaker. My vision blurred, and the edges of my world seemed to dissolve into nothingness. I could hear the faint cries of my family as they arrived, their voices trembling with fear and desperation. My wife's sobs pierced through the haze, and I longed to comfort her, to tell her that I was still here. But my body refused to respond. As the hours turned into days, I lay motionless on the hospital bed, teetering on the edge of life and death. The doctors told my family that my chances of survival were slim. My injuries were extensive, multiple fractures, internal bleeding, and a severe head injury that had left me unresponsive. They could only wait and pray. It was during this time, as my physical body remained trapped in a fragile state, that something extraordinary began to unfold within me. What I experienced next would challenge everything I thought I knew about life, death, and the divine. The night was quiet, save for the soft hum of machines keeping my fragile body alive. My family's prayers whispered through the sterile air of the hospital room, their words carrying both desperation and hope. But I was no longer bound to that room, nor to the body that lay lifeless within it. I felt an inexplicable pull, as though an unseen force was lifting me away. One moment, I was trapped within the confines of pain and silence, and the next, I was free, weightless, and aware of a profound shift in my existence. I looked down and saw myself pale, motionless, and surrounded by medical equipment. My wife clutched my hand, her face etched with anguish, while my children sat nearby, their small frames trembling with sobs. The scene was surreal, and for the first time, I understood the fragility of life in a way I never had before. Before I could dwell on the sight of my family, the force pulling me grew stronger. My surroundings faded, replaced by an enveloping darkness. It was not the kind of darkness that brought comfort or rest. It was oppressive, heavy, and alive with a presence I couldn't yet comprehend. The silence of the void was broken by faint whispers, distant at first, but growing louder with each passing moment. These voices were not familiar. They were filled with sorrow, anger, and despair, echoing like cries from the depths of an endless chasm. Panic gripped me as I tried to make sense of where I was and why I was here. I attempted to call out, but my voice was swallowed by the void. My heart raced as the whispers turned into a cacophony of wails, and shadows began to take form around me. Shapes moved within the darkness, their features indistinct yet menacing. My instincts screamed at me to flee, but there was nowhere to go. The force that had pulled me from my body was now propelling me deeper into this abyss. As I was drawn further into the void, a faint light appeared in the distance. It was dim, flickering like a candle struggling against a strong wind. Desperate for any semblance of hope, I focused on the light, willing myself toward it. The journey felt interminable, as though I was traversing a space that defied all understanding of time and distance. But the closer I got, the more the light revealed itself, not as a source of comfort, but as an opening to a desolate and foreboding landscape. When I emerged from the tunnel of darkness, I found myself standing on scorched ground. The air was thick with the acrid smell of burning sulfur, and the horizon was shrouded in a haze of ash and smoke. The landscape was barren, devoid of life, yet it pulsed with an energy that was both alien and terrifying. Shadows darted across the ground, their movements erratic and filled with an unsettling urgency. I could hear distant screams, anguished, unrelenting, and chilling to the core. For a moment, I stood frozen, unsure of what to do or where to go. My Islamic faith had always taught me of the afterlife, paradise for the righteous and hell for the sinners. Yet what I was witnessing now seemed beyond the scope of those teachings. This place was not the paradise I had longed for nor the hell I had feared. It was something altogether different, a realm that defied categorization. As I tried to make sense of my surroundings, I noticed figures emerging from the haze. They moved slowly, their steps deliberate, as though burdened by the weight of the landscape itself. When they drew closer, I felt a jolt of recognition. These were not strangers. They were scholars, leaders, and figures I had revered throughout my life. Men whose teachings had shaped my understanding of the world and my place within it. Their faces, once filled with wisdom and dignity, were now contorted with anguish and regret. One of them stepped forward, his eyes hollow and his voice trembling as he spoke. "Ibrahim," he said, "you must listen carefully. We are here to warn you. His words sent a chill through me. "Warmy?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Why are you here in this place? You were men of great faith, men who led others on the path of righteousness." The scholar lowered his head, his expression heavy with shame. "We were wrong," he confessed. "We followed teachings that blinded us to the truth. We believed our deeds and rituals would save us, but we were mistaken. There is only one way to salvation, and it is not what we preached." Before I could ask what he meant, a new presence made itself known. The very air around me seemed to shift, growing dense with an authority that silenced the whispers and screams. I turned and saw a figure unlike any I had encountered, a presence both majestic and sorrowful. His eyes pierced through me, carrying a weight of wisdom and sadness that I could not comprehend. He spoke my name, and though his voice was calm, it reverberated with a power that shook me to my core. "Ibrahim," he said, "you have been brought here for a purpose." I fell to my knees, overwhelmed by his presence. "Who are you?" I managed to ask, my voice barely audible. The figure's expression softened, and he replied, "You know who I am." As the realization dawned upon me, the ground beneath me seemed to shift. My heart pounded as I prepared to hear words that would change everything I had ever believed. The figure before me radiated a presence unlike anything I had ever encountered. His very being seemed to command the space around him, and yet there was an indescribable sorrow in his gaze, a sorrow that pierced through the deepest parts of my soul. My body trembled as I knelt before him, unable to speak, my thoughts swirling with questions I could not yet form into words. He took a step closer, and though his movements were gentle, they carried a weight of authority that made it impossible to look away. "Ibrahim," he said, his voice calm yet resounding with purpose, "you have been chosen to bear witness to the truth." My heart pounded in my chest. "Chosen?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "What truth? I have spent my life in service to God, teaching His word. What more could there be?" The figure's expression softened, and for a moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of compassion emanating from him. "You have served faithfully, but the truth you seek is not in the rituals or the laws you have followed. The truth is found in the one who came to fulfill all that was written." I stared at him, my mind racing. His words were unlike anything I had ever heard. "What do you mean?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. "Who is this truth you speak of?" He paused, and the air around us seemed to grow still. Then he spoke the words that shattered everything I thought I knew. "The truth is in Jesus," he said. "He is the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through him." The ground beneath me seemed to dissolve, and I felt as though I had been struck by a force far greater than any physical blow. "Jesus?" I whispered, my voice trembling. But I was taught that he was a prophet, no more than a man. How can he be the way to salvation? The figure's eyes held mine, unwavering. "What you were taught was incomplete. Jesus is not just a prophet. He is the Son of God, the fulfillment of all that was promised. Through him, salvation is made possible for all who believe." My mind reeled, and I felt as though the very foundations of my faith were crumbling beneath me. Everything I had ever known, everything I had ever taught, was being called into question. Yet, as I looked into the figure's eyes, I felt a deep sense of peace, a peace that transcended my confusion and fear. "Why me?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Why would I be chosen to carry this message?" The figure stepped closer, and I felt his hand rest gently on my shoulder. "Because your voice carries weight. You have spent a lifetime guiding others, and now you are being called to guide them to the ultimate truth. Time is short, Ibrahim. You must return and share what you have seen." As he spoke, the ground beneath me began to tremble, and the light around him grew brighter. The shadows that had once loomed in the distance began to recede, and I felt myself being pulled back, the force growing stronger with each passing moment. "Wait!" I cried out. "I still have so many questions." But the figure's voice followed me as I was drawn away. "The answers will come in time. Go, and do not delay. Share the truth. for it is the path to life. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the vision ended. I found myself hovering above my hospital bed, looking down at my own broken body. The machines beeped steadily, and my family remained by my side, their prayers unceasing. A bright light surrounded me, and with a sudden jolt, I gasped for air as my spirit returned to my body. Before we continue this incredible journey, I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below with your name and the city you're watching from so we can give you a shout out in our next video. Don't forget to like this video. It helps us grow our community and share more stories of hope and faith. Thank you for being part of this journey. The sound of the machines around me faded into the background as I lay motionless in my hospital bed. My body felt heavy, battered by the trauma of the accident, but my spirit burned with an intensity one had never experienced before. The vision was seared into my mind. The desolate landscape, the voices of those I had revered, and the figure who had revealed a truth that defied everything I had known. As the days passed, I began to regain strength. The doctors marveled at my recovery, calling it miraculous, but they couldn't see the transformation that had occurred within me. My heart was no longer the same. It beat with a newfound purpose, an unshakable conviction that I had been given a second chance, not just at life, but at fulfilling a mission far greater than myself. My family remained at my side, their relief palpable as I regained consciousness and began to speak. But how could I explain to them what I had seen? How could I tell them that the faith we had lived by, the teachings that had shaped every moment of our lives, were not the ultimate truth? The weight of this revelation was immense, and I knew that sharing it would not come without consequence. On the first night after I returned home, I sat in the quiet of my study, surrounded by the familiar comfort of my books and prayer mats. The Quran lay open before me, its verses so deeply ingrained in my memory that I could recite them without thought. Yet now, they felt distant, as though a veil had been lifted from my understanding. I closed my eyes and whispered a prayer, not one of ritual, but of raw, unfiltered emotion. God, guide me, I pleaded. Show me how to fulfill the purpose you have set before me. Over the next few days, I began to study with a fervor I hadn't felt in years. I sought answers, turning not only to the Quran, but also to the Bible. A nurse at the hospital had given me a copy during my recovery, a gesture I had initially dismissed as unnecessary. Now, I opened its pages with trembling hands, drawn to the words of Jesus as though they were a lifeline. His teachings, his compassion, and his sacrifice spoke to me in a way that nothing else ever had. As I delved deeper, the words of John 14, verse 6 echoed in my mind. I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. It was the same truth I had heard in the vision, and it resonated with a clarity that left no room for doubt. Jesus was not just a prophet. He was the Savior, the path to eternal life. But how could I share this with those around me? My wife, my children, my community, they all looked to me as a pillar of Islamic faith. To reveal this newfound truth would be to risk everything. My reputation, my relationships, even my safety. Yet the figure in the vision had been clear. I was not to remain silent. The truth was not mine to keep. It was a message meant to be shared. One evening, as my wife prepared tea in the kitchen, I gathered the courage to speak. Habiba, I began, my voice steady but my heart racing. There is something I need to tell you. She turned to me, her expression soft but curious. What is it, Ibrahim? You've been so quiet since you returned from the hospital. I took a deep breath, the weight of my words pressing heavily on my chest. While I was in the hospital, something happened to me. I saw things that changed everything I thought I knew. Her brow furrowed, concern flickering in her eyes. What do you mean? What did you see? I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. I had a vision, Habiba. I was taken to a place beyond this world, and I was shown a truth that I cannot ignore. It is about Jesus. He is not just a prophet. He is the way to salvation. Her reaction was immediate. She placed the teacup down with a trembling hand, her eyes wide with shock. Ibrahim, she whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. "What are you saying? How can this be? We have lived our entire lives in devotion to Islam. How could you even think such a thing?" I reached for her hands, holding them gently. "I know it's hard to understand. It was hard for me too. But Habiba, I cannot deny what I experienced. It was as real as the ground beneath our feet. I was told to share this truth, to guide others to the light." Tears welled up in her eyes as she pulled her hands away. "Ibrahim, this is blasphemy. You cannot speak of such things. What will the community think? What will happen to us?" Her words cut deep, but I knew that the path ahead would not be easy. "I understand your fear," I said softly. "But this is not about what others think. It is about what is true. I cannot remain silent, Habiba. I have been given this message for a reason, and I must share it." Her silence was deafening, and as she turned away, I realized the magnitude of what lay ahead. I would not only have to face the doubts and fears of my loved ones, but also the potential rejection of an entire community. Yet, deep within me, there was a peace that surpassed understanding, a certainty that I was walking the path I was meant to walk. The days following my revelation were filled with an uneasy stillness. My wife avoided speaking to me about what I had shared, her silence a mixture of confusion and fear. My children, too young to understand the depth of my inner struggle, continued to look at me with the innocence of youth, unaware that their father's faith, once an unshakable foundation, was undergoing a profound transformation. I spent hours in solitude, poring over scriptures from both the Quran and the Bible, searching for clarity. The Bible, which I had once dismissed as a book for others, now spoke to me with a power I could not ignore. Its words resonated in my soul, filling the gaps that had long lingered in my heart. I found myself drawn to the teachings of Jesus, captivated by his compassion, his humility, and the hope he offered to those who followed him. But with this newfound faith came an equally heavy burden, the question of how to share it. For decades, I had been a leader in the Muslim community, a man whose words were trusted and respected. Now, I felt like a stranger among those who had once looked to me for guidance. How could I stand before them and tell them that the very foundation of my teachings had shifted? The first time I returned to the mosque after my recovery, I felt the weight of countless eyes upon me. The congregation greeted me warmly, their faces filled with relief that I had survived the accident. They asked about my health, about my family, but I could sense an unspoken question lingering in their expressions. What had changed? What had I seen? During the prayer, my voice trembled as I recited verses from the Quran. The words felt different now, as though they were echoes of a past I could no longer fully embrace. As I stood before the congregation, leading them in worship, I realized that the path I was being called to walk would lead me away from this place, away from the life I had always known. Later that evening, I gathered a small group of close friends, men who had prayed beside me for years. I shared my story with them, recounting the vision, the words of Jesus, and the undeniable truth that had been revealed to me. Their reactions were as varied as they were painful. Some listened with curiosity, their expressions softening as I spoke. Others grew angry, their voices rising in protest as they accused me of abandoning my faith. One man, a dear friend I had known since childhood, stood and pointed a trembling finger at me. "Ibrahim," he said, his voice filled with sorrow, "you have lost your way. Everything you are saying goes against what we have been taught. How can you turn your back on the truth we have known all our lives?" I met his gaze, my heart heavy but resolute. "I understand your anger," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil within me. "But I cannot deny what I have seen. This is not about turning my back on anything. It is about embracing a truth that I was blind to before. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. I must follow him." The room fell silent, the weight of my words settling over us like a heavy fog. One by one, the men left, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and sadness. I watched them go, knowing that this was only the beginning of the challenges I would face. As I returned home that night, I felt an unshakable peace within me, despite the uncertainty that lay ahead. The words of the vision echoed in my mind, a constant reminder of the mission I had been entrusted with. I knew that my journey would not be easy, but I also knew that it was one I could not abandon. Thank you for being part of this incredible journey. We don't earn any money from sharing these stories. It's something we do because we love bringing these messages of faith and hope to our community. If you found this story meaningful, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. It would mean so much and help us continue sharing these powerful experiences. Let's grow this community together. The weeks that followed were the most challenging of my life. My decision to share the truth I had discovered set off a ripple of consequences that I had not fully anticipated. My wife, though loving and loyal, struggled to reconcile the man she had always known with the man I was becoming. My children, though innocent and full of love, began to notice the tension that had seeped into our home. And the community that had once celebrated me as a leader now regarded me with suspicion, some even with hostility. Yet, amidst the trials, I found a strength I had never known before. Each day, as I studied the words of Jesus, as I prayed for guidance, I felt a peace that surpassed all understanding. It was as if a light had been ignited within me, a flame that could not be extinguished no matter how strong the winds of doubt or fear. I began to speak more openly, not just to those closest to me, but to anyone who would listen. The message was simple yet profound. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. I shared the vision I had been given, the words of the figure who had revealed this truth to me, and the hope that had been planted in my heart. Some listened with open minds, their curiosity piqued by my conviction. Others turned away, their hearts hardened by years of tradition and fear of change. One evening, as I prepared for bed, my youngest child came to me, her small hands clutching the edge of my robe. "Baba," she said, her voice soft and filled with innocence, "why do you talk about Jesus so much now?" I knelt down to her level, looking into her wide, curious eyes. "Because, my love, Jesus is the light that guides us. He shows us the way to live, to love, and to find peace." She tilted her head, her brow furrowing in thought. "But what about what we learned before?" I smiled gently, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "What we learned before was not wrong, but now we see more clearly. It's like looking through a window that was dirty and finding that, once it's cleaned, the world outside is even more beautiful than we imagined." She nodded slowly, as if absorbing the weight of my words, and then wrapped her arms around my neck. "I love you, Baba." Tears filled my eyes as I held her close. "And I love you, my little one." As the days turned into months, my journey continued to evolve. The opposition I faced from the community grew stronger, but so too did my faith. For every door that was closed to me, another opened. For every voice raised in anger, another whispered words of encouragement. And through it all, I knew that I was not walking this path alone. My mission was clear: to share the truth I had been given, to be a witness to the light of Jesus, and to offer hope to those who were lost in darkness. It was not an easy road, but it was one I was willing to walk for as long as I was able. As I sit here now, sharing this story with you, I am filled with gratitude, not only for the second chance at life I was given, but for the purpose that has come with it. My journey is far from over, and there is so much more to share, so much more to discover. But for now, I leave you with this truth. No matter where you are, no matter what you have faced, there is a light that can guide you, a love that can save you, and a peace that surpasses all understanding. Thank you for being part of this journey. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to continue with us by watching the next video that's appearing on your screen right now. It holds a message that could be truly life-changing for you. Click on it and let the next chapter unfold in your life. Don't forget to give this video a like and comment "Amen" below to keep receiving blessings and to let us know you're part of this beautiful community. May you be richly blessed, and I'll see you in the next story.